Good evening, dear friends. I have already said several times that the European Union is suffering from two different panics. One is the inability to compete with the rest of the world, and the other is what the newly elected U.S. President Donald Trump is doing or will continue to do. In this spirit, the informal summit of the European Union took place a week ago on Monday. Again, it was confirmed how dangerous it is for the Union when it does not have its own foreign policy, when the great European players switch to the position of the so-called European Ministry of Foreign Affairs, purely pro-American, and at the same time insignificant former Eastern Prime Minister. Donald Trump does not respect the institutions of the European Union, nor the Union as such, and will prefer relations with individual member states. As a sign of respect for the European Union, he simply stated that he wants to take Gdansk, which is an integral part of Denmark. First of all, this is an exaggeration, but we can imagine that the European Union will go to defend Denmark with the same severity as it was and is with Ukraine. Well, not by chance. Today's announcement that the United States is ready to build high-tech facilities on steel and aluminum from Europe is the same expression of distrust between the U.S. President and the forces of the European Union. On the one hand, I appreciate that the European Commission has announced today that it will not react to new measures until the official decision of the U.S. President is on the table. On the other hand, I believe that the inability of the Union to compete with the United States will be a warning to great men in Europe for the following decisions. First, that Europe will buy even more gas and oil from the United States. In other words, one Eastern dependency will be replaced by the West. Secondly, as stated by the General Secretary of NATO, Europe will pay the United States for weapons for Ukraine. And thirdly, Europe, without greater resistance, has received a brutal increase in arms exports. And the deciding European players will rely on the fact that the U.S. President will come up with new measures. In case he does not, we must at least have a premonition what the decision to build high-tech facilities on steel and aluminum will mean for the entire Union and Slovakia, and what protective measures we are able to take in order to keep the quality Euro-Atlantic decisions going. However, I do not doubt for a second that the opposition, the anti-government media, and the ruling coalition have lost any sense of reality. In May last year, a political activist connected directly to the opposition wanted to kill me. And today they are creating a reality that I can basically do it myself, or that it did not even happen. And in a few days, when the murder of the journalist Kuciak and his friends on the square will be announced, that I am basically the enemy. It is even funnier with lies about our membership in the NATO Union, which no one doubts. The statements of the opposition are so distorted that even the chairman of the commission had to react to them, and the opening of them was denied. This is not enough for the opposition. Today they claim, without any evidence, because none exist, that they do not believe us, that we do not want to leave the Union, that we are mentally inclined to leave the Union. If even this does not work, then the argument will be used that last week I almost left some super important summit of Brussels. If it was such a super important summit of Brussels, why did not the representative of the European Parliament, as is the iron rule, sit down to it? Where are Mr. Semeka's conclusions from this super important summit, which are always accepted at a super important summit? Why weren't there those pushers at this super important summit, which are always there, Mr. Semeka? Well, because there was no super important summit. But the informal meeting of the prime ministers, to the relations with the United States, then with the General Secretary of NATO, Mark Rutte, and finally there was only an informal dinner with the British Prime Minister, to which I was the only one who did not participate, because after two important negotiations with the Commissioner for Energy and Policy and the Commissioner for the Legal State, I justified myself directly to the President of the European Council and left for Slovakia, because the solution to the crisis in the Slovak People's Party and the vote, which has not yet been resolved by the vote or the Slovak People's Party, that's all. But the President of Progressive Slovakia, as a senseless person, repeats one lie after another and invented new ones. I'm slowly starting to believe the lies that he went to an auxiliary school, because sometimes at public speeches he acts like that. I had a great time when Progressive Slovakia famously announced that it had issued a print for Slovakia in Kiev to President Zelensky, after the Ukrainian president unilaterally stopped the transit through Ukraine and significantly damaged the entire European Union and Slovak individuals. The TSA does not print a drop of gas through Ukraine to Slovakia. So you made a hole in the cake, and you know what? You only promised Zelensky that you would support the participation of Slovak soldiers in the combat mission in Ukraine and membership in NATO. Russian gas starts to flow to Slovakia through Turkstream, and this is thanks to the efforts of the Russian and Turkish sides, and they should be thanked for that. However, I don't remember that progressive Slovakia was in Moscow or Ankara. They didn't even go there. On the contrary, I expect recognition of this position for the fact that for several days, gas flows to Ukraine through a reverse pipe in the military, gas without which Ukraine would freeze. Slovakia does not have this ring. The suppliers are foreign companies. However, we have a moral right to consider methods such as stopping foreign supplies of about 7.5 million cubic meters to Ukraine. These foreign supplies from Europe to Ukraine cause even greater pressure on the price of gas, which today was moving at a record level of about 60 euros per megawatt hour. We are intensively focusing on this, both at home and at the European level, because Europe is making a fool of itself. Ukraine can damage it as much as it wants. Europe, however, cannot even cover Ukraine's hair. Just as the opposition should express itself to another noteworthy statement of the General Secretary of NATO, former Dutch Prime Minister Mark Rutte, who made it clear that the West is not losing the war on Ukraine, even though the front line is moving in the wrong direction. Rutte openly acknowledged what we have been talking about since the beginning of the conflict, and that the war on Ukraine benefits the West because it wants to weaken Russia through this war, which, however, will not happen, and it will be the West that will take advantage of Ukraine, which will pay the highest price. The opposition is running in Phariseeism, opportunism, and widespread lies. I had a great time with the chairman of the KDH, Mr. Majersk, and today's Führer in conclusion, and he again introduced me to his favorite competitive discipline of who will cooperate with whom after the elections. And with the exaggerated resistance, he rejected the direction of Slovak social democracy, calling itself a mess with extremists. It is true that the direction is still a mess with the voice of the Slovak National Party. However, I did not realize that I would be an extremist. The attitude is problematic, but it is not an opinion or a program. And the truth is that it is difficult to find a bigger Pharisee than KDH Majersk. Recently, the exit of the government in Czechoslovakia was primarily based on government money, and at the press conference, he spoke with me as if we were coalition partners. He is high enough to be seen there by everyone, and then he comes to the TV and talks about the Smeradske Priyag. Didn't you recently talk about another Priyag in connection with progressive Slovakia? The elections are still far away, in my opinion. But I have to admit to you that the solution to the crisis caused by The Voice and SNS that they did not keep their presidential clubs takes a lot of energy from me. In any case, let's keep our fingers crossed for the American and Russian presidents to find a solution to end the war as soon as possible. Let's keep our fingers crossed that we get the information as soon as possible how much the Slovak foreign media got from the destroyed American agency to liquidate parties such as Esmir. We all remember the statement of Mr. Simacek, who stated that without Soros's money, Vladimir Messiar would never be defeated. And keep your fingers crossed for me at home, because the definitive solution to the crisis in the voice of SNS is approaching, which will lead to either further fulfillment of the program announcement or to the previous elections. Smer, Slovak Social Democracy. As a stable and experienced party, is ready for all options. Have a nice evening.